Viewer discretion is advised. So my next major video project's gonna be a while just because I have a lot of recording to do for it. So I figured I'd make an intermediate video until then to try to hold over the release schedule. This video is also going to be about a Nintendo game, and because I don't trust them, I won't be able to show you any footage that would best relate to what I'm about to talk about here because, I mean, Nintendo, you know, copyright claims. Fun! So this isn't super new news, but it's new to me, so that's good enough. A YouTuber by the name DocTrey81 managed to do some digging around LinkedIn after a supposed rumor that Bandai Namco was going to be the developer of the next Metroid Prime game. The results of his digging was this screenshot that you can see on screen right now, which shows a lead designer from Bandai Namco Studios Singapore and the supposed projects that he's working on. The very first one of which is a unannounced IP first-person shooter adventure exclusive for the Nintendo Switch. So, just really quick here, as far as hard evidence goes, that's it. This one screenshot right here is all of the hard evidence that we have, of which is not even an actual confirmation of this. Just keep that in mind, because the rest of this, as you might guess, is pure speculation on anyone's part. To be fair though, you could take this and move forward with just that knowledge and see what kind of interesting things you could find, even if this doesn't turn out to be the Metroid Prime game, which is exactly what Eurogamer did, taking that YouTube video and running with it, using all of the evidence that they had, to try to figure out a little bit more about the Bandai Namco Studios of Singapore. Evidence eventually led them to the fact that this studio is actually rather recent, only forming in 2016. However, it's not exactly a new bunch of developers, as it's actually staff from the former LucasArts Singapore, who, among other things, according to them, worked on the Star Wars 1313 game. For anybody who's unaware, that Star Wars 1313 game was going to be a Boba Fett spin-off game, where you played as him at a very young age and then eventually led to the hardened bounty hunter. I mean, I can see why Disney canceled it, because they want to make their own spin-off movie for him. Point being, though, that this is the same team that worked on that game. I won't deny that this sounds great for the Metroid franchise. I mean, this was the Star Wars bounty hunter game. You kinda can't get too much closer than that as far as Metroid is concerned. Aside from the fact that it's also a space fantasy game, much like Star Wars' space fantasy series. Yeah, okay, they're very similar, but we'll get into that a little bit more in just a second. According to the Eurogame article, since publishing, they've gotten an update that the Bandai Namco Studios of Japan is going to try to take over the reins of this project away from the Singapore team so that the Singapore team can focus on another project. Now, from that screenshot, we can probably guess that that's for Ridge Racer for Switch, I guess. But the thing about that is that they don't list any sources for that, so, you know, speculation on top of speculation. That's great. Anyways, before I go insane, about the only thing we honestly know is that this may be being made by Bandai Namco. Maybe. There's no confirmation if this is made by Bandai Namco. If it is being made by them, we still know nothing, just that maybe it's the same team that was working on a canceled Star Wars game. That's about it. How am I supposed to turn this into an entire video? The answer is letting my speculation go completely wild. So, I guess the biggest thing to address here is, do I think this is actually true? Do I think that this is actually the next Metroid development team? Honestly, based off of just that screenshot, I want to say yes, but there's not enough information. I still don't know. And I mean, that's the problem I'm sitting at. If I go forward with this, I mean, I guess I'm somewhat committing to the idea that I think that this is true, but I really don't know. And I don't want to dismiss it, because who knows, maybe it's true. Maybe this is actually the case. I mean, it seems very plausible, but honestly, we won't know anything until Nintendo literally tells us. And if this is true, it will be one of those things where it's like, who really cares? kind of thing. Like, okay, so we know this person found this one leak this one time. Doesn't mean that we trust them every single time. If they were knocking it out of the park every single time, like they leaked something 20 times in a row and they got it right, we'd assume that they'd have insider information at that point and they'd know what they're talking about. But that's not important. That's neither here nor there, because that's not the bulk of where my speculation lies. If I'm going forward with this as possibly true, then this actually kind of takes a bit more of an, I don't want to say negative, but I will just call it interesting turn. Let me explain. It's a rather common practice in the industry to just make games and then try to see if you can sell them as a licensed product even before you have the licensing. Because if you're a developer and you need cash and you know this publisher has this IP and you probably can convince them, you make a game, you demo it to them and be like, hey, we can sell this as such and such IP. Now, when a game gets canceled for whatever reason, licensing issues or whatever, it's also not an uncommon practice to then rework that licensed product into something else completely. So if this is in fact the developers for the next Metroid Prime 4, and they were working on this Star Wars project before now, well, chances are Bandai Namco is taking whatever's left over of that project and trying to sell it as the next Metroid Prime game to Nintendo. That would be honestly what I bet my bottom dollar on if any of this honestly crap is true. Now, this poses an interesting dilemma because, I mean, I would think that most Star Wars fans, as well as most Metroid fans, would agree. Star Wars is not Metroid. Metroid is not Star Wars. If you're gonna take a Star Wars game and morph it into Metroid, just because they're two sci-fi titles, doesn't mean that you won't have to do a ton of work just to make it fit with the different universe. I mean, honestly, the Star Wars game was probably going to be an NPC-driven game with quests and the like, being morphed into a game series that has primarily been about isolation and exploring planets with just your wits, firepower, and a whole bunch of hostile enemies ready to wreck your face. That's mainly my concern with it. If it turns out that they stripped almost all of the Star Wars elements that make it not really feel like a Metroid game, like they took out all NPCs, you're just by yourself exploring maybe 1 to 2 planets, and it's just you versus a bunch of hostile stuff and space pirates being replaced with law enforcement. I mean, I'm thinking about this in my head. I could actually see it being not the easiest thing, but not the hardest thing to translate into a different game series. And again, this is just speculation. Who knows? I could be insanely wrong. I could be more on point than I even realized. I'm running off of a speculative screenshot that was then used in a speculative article, and now I'm making my own speculations on top of that. Not really the greatest idea in the world to base any serious amount of faith into. I saw this, and just Metroid Prime has been one of my favorite, I guess, mini-series of a franchise. So I was really, really interested when I first saw the Nintendo announcement, and I was kind of excited. And simultaneously disappointed because they told us nothing. It was almost literally as if the game had started development. And based off of this, all I can assume is because the game still looks too much like Star Wars for Nintendo to show off anything without getting the absolute hell suit out of them. Kind of ironic if it's true when you think about it. Ultimately, we don't know. This is just me making wild assumptions. Like I said, it could be true, it could be nothing. Who honestly knows? I just thought it would be kind of fun to at least talk about it. When I first heard the announcement, I wasn't angry. I was concerned. But now, I mean, really breaking it down, who honestly knows? If it does turn out to be 100% true, okay, well, that would be somewhat confusing and bad. If it does turn out that it's true that Namco Bandai is working on the next one, it's concerning, but not the worst thing in the world. So we really just have to wait for this year's E3, honestly. That will be the only time we'll get any real amount of information. And if we get nothing from this year's E3, then guess what? Yeah, we'll just have to wait for the next one. Them's the crappy breaks we've been dealt. I mean, on the only other random side note, for some reason Amazon Prime is labeling this game coming out December 28th of 2018, which is a very, very, very odd date, and I don't think it's actually true. I just think it was like a placeholder date. I don't know if that's true. If somebody can confirm that, this is literally the only thing I found in regards to a release date, and it was just kind of odd to me because I figured, like, if they didn't know what the date was, that Amazon would just leave it blank. But hey, that's a crazy assumption for another day. Let's just kind of end this here, honestly, with a giant we don't honestly know, but maybe this is the case if we do, or rather this may be the case if it's true.